You're listening to the Empowered Divorce Podcast, where you practice being the chooser in your life again, one day at a time. Thanks for joining me. Hello, my amazing, beautiful listeners. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I have a special episode for you. This was an episode that I recorded on the Choose to Be podcast with Morgan Ellsworth. Alana and I were doing a series around children and children of betrayed parents, and these two episodes back to back, today's and then next week's, that I'm going to be sharing with you. This week is Morgan and next week is Alana's daughter, Hannah. These two episodes, when we recorded them for the Choose to Be podcast, these two specifically, I kept thinking about you, my listeners over here on this podcast, and how these are conversations that I would have really valued and loved to hear while I was navigating divorce. This week is the conversation that I had with Morgan. I'll jump right into it, introduce her a little bit. And then next week is the conversation with Hannah Gordon. She is 18 years old, an incredibly amazing young woman who I think articulates her experience really, really well. And as I was listening to her in that conversation, again, I felt like, gosh, if I was listening to this, I would feel so much hope. I would probably shift the way that I think about my children a little bit different based on the conversation that Alana and I had with Hannah. I'm excited for this week and next week's episodes to share with you. But let's get into my conversation with Morgan Ellsworth. Today, I'm talking with Morgan Ellsworth, who works directly with teens, young adults, parents, and families navigating betrayal trauma and that relational rupture. Morgan's work is deeply personal because her journey into this field started with her own lived experience of betrayal as a teenager, and over a decade of healing that followed. Her work, her professional work, integrates family systems, somatic healing, coaching, trauma-informed care, and relational repair. And what I love about her approach is that it doesn't separate individual healing from family healing. She really understands how interconnected all of this is. She works with betrayed partners, couples, like I said, teens, young adults, parents, trying to help families find their grounding, find that clarity and safety, and find that path forward after everything feels so destabilized. She is also the host of the new podcast, Healing Betrayed Families, which is such a needed voice in this space because finally we're talking about a whole system and not just the couple. I'm excited about this conversation, and I think it's going to add beautifully to the last 2 weeks that we have talked about this. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Morgan. Morgan, thank you for joining our conversation. And we've done our listeners we didn't intend to make this kind of a 3-part series, so to speak, around addressing the concerns of teenagers, because I think we're focusing on teen young adult because I think there is a level of maturity, and like our listeners heard in Hannah even talking last week, the things that she was observant to and cognitively aware to, so much different than when she hit 14 and on up. So we are focusing more on that age group because there is a huge difference on what they're even privy to in terms of information and understanding what's really going on. So we are focusing more on that age group, but your specialty is that age group, young adult, and the impact when young adults, teenagers, young adults of parents with betrayal in their story. And it is now something that you're very passionate about and have a podcast, which I'm going to plug the heck out of through this entire episode, but share just a little bit of maybe your journey and why for you, this is something you led to focus on and make your niche more so than maybe a lot of the other things that you do really, really lovely and well. What makes this special for you and to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think my personal story is such a big part of my professional career and my professional journey. When I was in my undergrad, so my bachelor's degree is in family life. And originally I went to school and I was like, well, this is a great degree. It'll help me if I want to be a mom, and if I decide I want to do something else, it'll fit. And I have this memory of like being in college and this like wave of, hey, families need to be able to heal. And what
Mm,
your family has gone through, other families need what you're not, and again, not that my family is not perfect and we are not fully healed, but we have a level of healing. Like the fact that my parents stayed married after infidelity and they have walked their own recovery journey, that was very clear impression in my mind. Like, you need to be the one to help other families heal. And so that moment, like I think that is one of my like pivotal moments in why I chose to do what I am doing. And it's interesting how the cards fell to get me to where I am today. I graduated and took a year off of school and had my first child, and then started back in my master's program for marriage and family therapy. And that was hard to believe, that was over 3 years ago. I just graduated in December. So I'm on my way to becoming a therapist. And really, my experience being a betrayed child and experiencing betrayal trauma as a teenager, and watching my parents do the work and then stepping into the work myself and experiencing my own level of healing. Like every time I am able to heal a part of myself, I get that much more passionate and excited about taking that to other people, because I think this is just such like an underserved area in the betrayal trauma community. Not very many people know what it's like as the kid, and
right,
there's not a ton of professionals who are trained in both spaces to be able to support the kids. And so I feel
right.
like I am just trailblazing in a lot of ways. Being a betrayed child and now on the other side in the professional space has definitely informed the work that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Alana mentioned that last time, like or maybe it's when we were talking to Elia, but yeah, this is going to be very interesting in the next 10 years where we have this chunk of a generation that have experienced this and how it's going to impact them, and having more and more, I think, studies and record of the impact. So I think that's a really important word. You just use trailblazing, and for you to, again, like you said, have experienced it and now support families to support the young adults and the teens that are going through it, but also to support the teens and the young adults that are going through that. Really, really important, and an important niche to have for sure. I know I'm sending a bunch of people. Listen, because it is. I think of even my kids. They had a therapist way back then, but they're still implementing, they're still integrating, they're still figuring out, even as adults, their story and what this means and their impact. And they'll call me after their therapy sessions with still these aha or oh, and now I see moments. And I'm grateful that they can call me and we can talk and even have moments of repair, but the work doesn't end. And my story is that I did divorce, right? And the impact on children stay, I think, whether married or not, which is a really important message in of itself, right?
Absolutely. Oh, what's coming to me as you're talking about that. I remember, so I did the APSATS training, this betrayal trauma training, how to work with the betrayed partner. And when I took that, that gave such like those aha moments. It gave such clarity and meaning to my own experience that when I
Mhm.
could start to put the language and I'm like, wait a freaking second, I also went through betrayal trauma. Like, that shifted a lot of things for me in my recovery, and I think that's the piece when, when your kids are getting support, or if you're seeking out therapy or coaching for them, like, having a therapist who or a coach who has been betrayed in that way and can put that frame or that language on it can be very sensitive to that specific type of trauma that your child is going, because it is, right? It very much is a trauma, and the framework and the language that they use is different. Like it's specialized. And so, just to add to that point, like, why am I doing this? Because I think both pieces, the lived experience and the understanding of betrayal trauma and trauma's impact on the body and family system, like there's so many pieces that I think are so important that need to be highlighted when working with kids, and that
Yeah.
it's just so important to be able to look at the trauma for what it is, that it's not a disorder, it's not a whatever behaviors are coming up, like this is a relational trauma that they've gone through, and we have to treat it as such.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a million different roads that we can go down with this
Yeah,
topic, right?
yeah,
I'm I know some hot topics or pivotal points that I feel like a lot of our listeners in the middle of this would love to hear, but I'm going to actually let you guide based on what you generally see or feel like are some of, we'll just say, the hot spots, the hot topics when it comes to addressing teen and young adult issues with betrayal.
yeah. Oh, so many places to start. My brain goes to 2 places, so maybe we'll jump in. I think speaking to what I was just talking about, the fact that kids are experiencing trauma, a lot of times after betrayal, after infidelity, after divorce, you'll see, like, changes in kids, and parents are very aware that, oh, maybe kids start to withdraw and they pull away, or maybe they're hanging out with people who are not great influences, or they are trying new things, they're pushing boundaries, they're testing the waters, they're trying to express with their actions, like, some of this inner turmoil that they may be feeling, and a lot of times too, like, the kids aren't aware that that's what's happening, right? They don't know that, "Oh, well, I wanna be alone and cry in my room late at night because that's just how I'm feeling," but a lot of times what's missing is the fact that maybe that's a trauma response. Maybe there's some regulation that needs to happen. Emotional too, like the emotional impact on kids. Like, I know my own experience experiencing a range of emotion, like when if you've ever done work with a betrayed partner, I know Amie has, if you're listening, when you're in this work, a lot of times they'll talk about the emotions that come up, right? Rage and anger and sadness and grief. And there's this roller coaster of emotions that you're probably not used to experiencing, like up until this point in your life. When did you have such a wide array of emotions coming to the surface? And a lot of times with kids, it's the same. Like they are feeling things and not having the tools to regulate or cope with it or process through it effectively. And so, like, I don't know if this is on the recording or before we hit record, we were talking about how, like, betrayal in a child a lot of times can mirror a betrayed partner.
Mhm.
And so think about what that experience was like for you, and then notice if you're the betrayed partner, notice what's happening in your kids. Like it may be a similar experience to what they're going through because it's a trauma nonetheless, and their body is responding in a similarly traumatized way.
Right, right. As you're talking, what's coming to my mind too is the importance of language. In my journey, in my experience going through betrayal and not having a language, and way back then, it was not really a language and not a whole lot of narrative to describe what's going on. And that's always been something I talk about all the time. And it's just very important that every time I had a language or a narrative, and not necessarily to pathologize, but just to define and go, oh yeah, that's what that is, or that's what I'm experiencing, to help lessen the crazy feeling, make a little bit more sense of what that is. I'm imagining these teens and these young adults not having a language to describe, to define, to help them go, oh, well, this is what's going on and this is why. And when we find out why, and how many times I would read something or hear a term and it would make sense, it would click, and I'd be like, ah, and there would just be this sense of relief, like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. When we can understand what's going on in ourself, there's a level of compassion. I feel like it ignites that compassion and gentleness and self understanding that eases that fight or that resistance a little bit, or even being a little hard on ourselves. So, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like for teens and adults in terms of giving them a language and giving them context? And I think this is the part that I think is really challenging is, so like if you were to hindsight 2020, your younger self, right? Because a lot of moms, a lot of, I'm going to genderize here, a lot of betrayed partners are in that struggle of, well, do I tell them? Do I how much do they need to know to help with this language that you're talking about, Amie? So can we just really dig into maybe this language and what we're really talking about there? If that makes sense.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And here's my shameless plug to my podcast. Like, two of my most recent episodes are talking about language to give your kids. I actually had a mom, I'm working with a mom, and she's like, Morgan, how do I tell my kids what I'm going through as a betrayed partner? How do I talk to my kids about just what it's like? And so I did a little episode and I was like, when it comes out, you'll know that this is for you, speaking to my client. And it's that, it's giving parents language to know how to share and talk about these things with your kids. I did another one about psychological abuse. So going and very clearly defining what are the patterns that you should be watching for, gaslighting and manipulation and all the things. And yes, the language, the narrative is such an important piece. I remember my mom and I had this conversation, and we were a few years into our recovery journey. I think I had like just graduated high school, and we had this conversation. And I remember like the first time she was open with me about her experience with betrayal trauma. That was another moment for me that I was like, oh, like puzzle pieces literally being put together
Mm,
in my brain.
mm.
And when I think about like really impactful moments in my own healing, that conversation was one of them because just like you mentioned, I finally had language for what was happening. A lot of times I think kids are intentionally left in the dark because we're trying to protect them.
Right.
And so we don't want them to know that X, Y, and Z is happening, or dad has an addiction, or mom had an affair. Like, we don't want them to know because we think we're protecting them. And to a level, yes, you need to protect them from the deep, dark, like the darkest moments, your biggest trauma. Like, there are levels and details that we don't want to share with them, but they need to know what is happening in their story. If dad battling addiction for their entire childhood is part of their story, kids need to be able to have that language. Same with if you're getting a divorce or if you're facing infidelity in your relationship, you can give them enough information for them to make sense of what is happening. One of the things, and this is my own experience and a lot of the kids that I work with, is kids are very egocentric in their thinking. So a lot of times they'll think like, well, this is about me. Well, mom and dad are fighting because I failed my math test, right? Or mom and dad are getting a divorce because me and my brother can't get along, right? And if they don't understand what's happening, at least to the level of like, this isn't about you. There are some things happening in our relationship and we need to we'll keep you updated as we know what's going on, but being able to give them enough to put the story together in their brain, because if not, they're creating false narratives and they have these stories in their head and they think it's about them, and it really can be a confusing and a messy place because really
Mhm.
their brains aren't wired. They don't have the capacity at a young age to be able to like process all the information. And so just to
Right.
kind of drive that home, the language piece is so important. And as a parent, that's something you can do to really like hold their hand through their healing journey, is giving them language to make sense and put the truth of their reality and their story together.
Yeah. No, I love that you're saying that. And the truth of their reality and their story doesn't always, like you said, need to involve all of the details of our story. It's still a reality collapse and reality fragmentation that they're having, and it's going to be very different. So, what coming to my mind is, in a lot of my divorce ladies or separation towards divorce type, what do I tell kids? And kids are asking questions, and I'm always encouraging parents to ask more questions before answering the question. Because a lot of times, what kids are asking isn't really what they're asking or
Mhm.
what they need to know. To your point, they're very egocentric, and even they want to know, how does this impact me? And
Mhm.
how does this impact my life? And am I still gonna be able to do the same things? It's still very, very self-centered. And I wish someone would explain this a little bit more. I'm grateful that I had a therapist come in and help at some point. But before that, when my oldest kept asking me questions, I would answer, but I found out that's not really what she wanted to know. She really just wanted to know, how does this impact her going to school or seeing her friends or her life? So even just slowing down when our kids have a bunch of questions and saying, okay, here are you with this question. Can I just ask, what are you really wanting to know with that? Or other of those follow up type, and you might get to another deeper layer that is more about them and less about you, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Because I think a lot of times we think we have to be prepared to explain the thing. And I
Mhm.
don't really think that's what they are wanting all the time,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, what comes up for me when you're talking about that, when thinking in terms of attachment, that if a kid is coming to you and they've experienced like an attachment wound from a parent, they have this part of them that is hurting. And when whether they're expressing emotion or asking a question, a lot of times I will think, okay, that's what's on the surface, right? Sometimes that's called a secondary emotion, or you could use this secondary question if you wanted, but there's
Mhm.
something up here that is presenting that is a symptom of what's underneath, right? And so I love that. If you can slow it down and get curious, okay, why do you want to know that? What's underneath?
Mhm.
Like sometimes I'll tell parents, sometimes you have to turn on your inner therapist a little bit and
Yep.
begin to ask a deeper question,
Yep.
right? When you ask those deeper questions, their attachment need will a lot of times come out.
Yep.
And they'll say, "Well, I'm afraid of this," or "I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling abandoned. I need comfort." Like whatever it is, a lot of times will come out. Then you're way more equipped as the parent. You have a lot more information to know how to support that kid, and really in a way that's not just like a band-aid. Like sometimes they'll come, like you were sharing, Amy, they came to me, your daughter came to you with this question and I didn't know what to say, so I answered, and I think of it like a band-aid. Well, here's my band-aid answer. I'm
Mhm.
really activated. That's going to activate you. But if we can slow the process down and be very intentional with the pieces that we share with them, it'll help really get to the core of why they're asking their questions and what they're really needing. And yes, there are details that are important to share. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of times it's kids are battling something internal that they don't always have conscious awareness of, and
Right.
slowing it down can really tap into what they really are needing and wanting from you in that interaction.
Yeah. They're still trying to you said something earlier about that conversation that you and your mom had, and it put some puzzle pieces together. I feel like there's some of those that we can put together again without having to give the nitty-gritty details of what's going on. It's just, yeah, when I was in my room for 4 hours, that's what was happening. I was crying, I was upset, I was dealing with a lot of stuff. I wasn't mad at you. I wasn't shutting you out. You didn't do anything wrong. That might have been a reality puzzle for them that they were trying to figure out what was going on when mom was locked in her room for 4 hours, and they've got their own story and they're buzzing around and again making it mean something about them. And when I can just put that reality piece together, I didn't have to give any details. It was, yes, I was experiencing something. I was triggered. I was sad. This had nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
But and that can put that puzzle piece together. So those are, I think, more of the things that we can be attuned towards and look for rather than what I see a lot of clients do is figuring out what details to share and what details not to share, if that makes sense. There's a lot of
Yeah.
effort in that part that I think
Yeah.
I know I did spend a lot of time trying to navigate and figure out, and I can look back and see that I didn't need to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you bring up such another good point that is coming to my head is not gaslighting your children, right? This is
Mhm.
something that Jessica
Mm.
Idens will say a lot. And that idea that what they're seeing, like what we're telling them and thinking in terms of detail, like what we tell our kids and how we respond should match what they're experiencing and witnessing in the home. Why was mom locked in her room for 4 hours? Well, I had a therapy session that was really hard for me. And I needed to spend some time and like get regulated before I came back out, right? That is perfect level of detail that's not too much. But
Yeah.
as we do that, I think there's a couple really big impacts. One, obviously, if you have been a betrayed partner, the damage that gaslighting can cause. So you're preventing some of that from happening. But I think on another level too, like conversations like that, validating especially the like emotional, what's the word? Emotional like energy in the home, you're starting to shift the culture of your family.
Yeah.
So I know like in my family, we did not talk about emotion growing up. I was always an emotional child and I was labeled the drama queen and I when it wasn't okay to like have these emotions and hence why I cried in my room because I felt like I was a problem because I had these feelings. But I think as you can as the parent like validate what they're seeing and experiencing for yourself and give them language of this is what I'm doing, like they almost have permission to also not be okay. Like,
Right.
they have permission to have the feelings and feel like it's safe and okay to talk about it, and that's gonna take a long like, my family, we've been in the work for 10 years, almost, more than 10 years, and we're still shifting and working on the culture of changing that, but
Hmm.
starting to, like, tell them, "It's okay, whatever you're feeling is coming up, like, it's okay to feel that because look, I'm also feeling that as the
Yeah.
parent."
That's a really hard one. I know it was for me, but it comes up a lot too. Cognitively, I think a lot of people will say, yes, I know it's okay for my children to have negative emotion.
Yeah.
They'll even say it that way. Like, yes, I know. I know it's okay. But how we are actually allowing in the space and stepping out of that over functioning codependency really with our children's nervous systems is saying a different thing. Can you talk a little bit about that piece? Because I think cognitively everybody who listens to us say it's okay for children to have negative emotions would say, yeah, I know, but
Mhm.
we don't want it. And the truth is, I think, again, depending on the age, and like you were mentioning earlier, how a child is responding, especially early in betrayal and early in the work,
Mhm.
if they are responding in a more overt, maybe extreme way, or a scary covert way where they're really diving down into that silencing, isolation, depression, when there's a worrisome thing there, right? We want to fix, we want to solve, we want to jump in. It doesn't feel okay for them to feel when I think we're noticing an extreme emotion showing up. We'll just label there for a minute because that's what it feels like. You're witnessing this extreme emotion. So we want to fix. You don't want them to feel that. Can you talk about those experiences and maybe give some advice there?
Yes. Okay. I love this. I'm like working with this with some clients right now, so it's fresh on my mind. As the professional, when I see things like that in my whether it's my therapy office or my coaching space, my brain doesn't go to, well, they just need more discipline. Like I try not to pathologize that child, right? I try to look at it from the lens of trauma. Their nervous system is activated. Something in their body does not feel safe to them, and
Mhm.
that's why this emotion may be coming out. And so from a professional lens, looking at it that way, but as a parent, right, I'm working with a mom right now with a younger child, but he's tantruming a lot. And so something that I was talking to her about was he doesn't need discipline, right? You're not just trying to shut the emotion off. What he needs is co-regulation. He needs a safe, calm, grounded nervous system to be able or place to be able to feel that and process it in a safe way. And
Mhm.
so as I'm speaking, like if you're the mom in this place and you're like, "Well, I'm pretty dysregulated myself. I can't do that for my kids." Like just know this is a great time to introduce a professional for your child to be able to have a place, even if it's once a week, to go and get that calm, grounded place where they can express and share some of those emotion because it is like this isn't an emotion that we want to shut off, right? We don't want to fear them or shame them or discipline them because they're angry. Like let's help them process through it. And if they need to talk about it or if they need to get it out, right? We have a punching bag in my garage and my husband and my 3-year-old all the time when he's angry. My 3-year-old knows like, "Dad, I gotta go punch the bag." So like redirect them in ways that they can release the emotion in a healthy way.
Mhm.
Much like as a betrayed partner, you're also learning how to do for yourself. And so, again, a lot of the work that as a parent you're learning for yourself, support your kids through that. And if you're not in a place to like jump in and do it perfectly, which you're never going to be perfect, but if you're feeling like I don't have the capacity to do that, reach
Mhm.
out, get your child some support and even some like parent child sessions where you guys can talk about it together. Hey, how do I co-regulate, help co-regulate this child? And
Mhm.
it's going to look so different for every child and at different ages, but that was
Right.
the first place my brain went is they doesn't need discipline, they need co-regulation.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a level of what I'm hearing you saying there too of allowance for their own experience. I think one thing that really stood out to me, aha moment in my own journey was at one point I felt like I was expecting, I didn't realize I was consciously doing this, but I was expecting my children, I'll just say like the two oldest ones, big gaps in mine, but the two oldest ones to be at the same place that I am in terms of awareness and reality.
Mhm.
I had just had this reality and just like all this information and like, oh my gosh. And not that I was telling them all the details, but at some point I was like, you can obviously see that he's doing ABC and XYZ and all blah, 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 blah. Like you can see it too. Why are you still in denial? Why are you still justifying? Where? And I was thinking this, like, what is going on? Why can't they see? Why can't they see? And at one point I had this moment of, oh, I'm 18 years into this of seeing reality, of having the ahas, of my awareness catching up to what my body was denying and or what my mind was denying for so long. I realized that my children were doing the same thing. And
Mm.
I've watched all of them do the same thing in their own way and in their own timing. Just come into their own terms and process reality and acceptance and all those things we talk about all the time. And I had to let go of expecting them to be on the same, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, level
Mhm.
of awareness that I was at. And I
Yeah.
think those of you who are going through separation divorce, this is a really important piece
Yeah.
because sometimes the behavior of the other person gets worse and is more overt and and the kids can see the ill behavior. And sometimes we're looking at our kid going, why can't you see that over there and see what I'm saying? And a lot of times the kids then turn against the betrayed partner and blame the betrayed partner because what's happening is they're still in denial. They're still trying to figure out reality, right? So there's a real messy middle, if I'm explaining all of this right, that I feel like can be so tricky. And that's where I see a lot of maybe over information being shared because that's where I wanted, well, let me just tell you really what's going on because
Mhm.
you obviously need to catch up.
Yeah.
And that's where I had to be very lovingly corrected by my therapist.
Yeah.
Well, they've got to figure this out in their own timing.
Yes. Yes. I 100%. I'm working with a mom in that space right now, and I'm seeing these unhealthy patterns between my husband and my child. What do I do?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
and
so hard.
yeah, and to that point, like this is where that line between protecting your kids and allowing them to walk their own path. Like they, as much as this, if we want to like fight back against this, I mean, your kid is their own person, right? They have their own agency, they have their own path that they have to walk, and they have to step into healing for themselves. And as the
Mm,
mom, like so unfair to sit back and have to watch it and not say that you just have to sit back and let everything happen. Obviously, there are things that as the betrayed parent, like you should be protecting as much as you can. If there are safety concerns, obviously stepping in, but sometimes what we have to do is we have to educate our kids about the unhealthy patterns.
Right.
And when mom or dad said this to you, well, how did that make you feel? And how do you want to respond differently, knowing that this is how he shows up, right?
Mhm.
And like, in a way, coaching them through those interactions, the way you learned as the betrayed parent
Mhm.
to set boundaries and have a voice and create safety in relationships. Your child also needs to learn how to use their voice and set boundaries with that parent and choose how they're going to show up with them. And
Yeah.
so there is such a tricky place of like, where do I protect versus where am I trying to control their experience? And how do I, as the mom, navigate that place of like letting them figure it out, letting them have their own relationship and their own journey. And I
It's
just,
it's so
yes,
hard. I think it
yeah,
started for me of reminding myself negative emotions are not good, bad, right, or wrong. And then just catching myself when I wanted to solve for the negative emotion. If I could just take a moment and go, am I trying to solve for an emotion? And if I am, I needed to pause and not jump in. And what am I actually solving for? Because if it is solving for safety issue, that's different than solving for a negative emotion.
yes,
And I think that's
yeah,
a great way to slow it down and mitigate between jumping in and jumping and not jumping in when you're in the middle of this, because to your point, sometimes we do need to say, hold on, there is a safety issue here. But I just for me had to just stop and go, okay, what am I solving for? And if it
yes,
isn't for a negative emotion because that's allowed, then what am I solving for? And just break it down that way. That might be a great way to self-reflect.
yeah, absolutely. I love that distinction, right? Because I hope, and I'm glad you clarified. I hope nobody listened to my response and was like, wait a sec, you're telling me not to protect my, no, absolutely. In cases of safety and you have that responsibility to jump in and protect and keep your child safe. And your child also, especially as they're older teens and young adults, they also need to learn how to create safety and recognize unsafe patterns for themselves. Right? If their mom is always
Yeah.
the one to step in and intervene and set the boundaries for them or try to force them in whatever direction, they're not going to learn. And so they also have to be able like be given the chance to learn how to create that safety for themselves as well. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think
The
that's
older
such an
teen, young
important.
adult is so important. And those of you listening, like you heard Hannah talk about this, and that was a lot of her work is coming into her own story and into her own experience and separating it between the two. So you're right. This is such an important releasing, so to speak, when we're talking about older teen, young adult, especially. I'm curious, Morgan, if you were to look back on that version of you, that older teen, young adult Morgan, what are some things I want to be like, what would you tell yourself then, now that you think would be helpful for parents to hear and know?
Yeah. Oh, so many pieces. So many pieces. One thing that I wish, and this was for myself, and that like I wish really I don't ever place like my parents did a great job, right? I really am I have a great relationship with both my parents. So I don't ever want to be like, well, my parents should have done this. What I want to say is what I wish my parents' therapist would have told them is to support me in my emotion, right? That I was that child who I had a lot of emotion and it was all over the place. And I felt like I had to hide that.
Mm.
I felt like nobody could see it, right? And something my parents, "Well, don't talk to people. We don't want people to know." And so I'm a talker. If you haven't I have the gift of gab and I had people that I was like not always the most like safe and supportive people in my life that I was like, I have nowhere else to put this emotion. So I'm going to tell my friends and so I'll own that one. I can totally own that one. But what I wish I could tell myself now, like looking back, is I wish I had the tools to deal with that. I wish I had a better understanding of like okay, when I have this emotion, what is an okay way to talk about it or process it or help my body to release it? Because I didn't have that. And it was like, I was like textbook example of like, if you hold it in, it comes out in other ways. Like,
Oh, sounds sideways.
that was me.
Yeah.
So, like, just that validating the normalizing the emotional experience, and then, again, I wish, uh, my mom's therapist would have told her, "Hey, Morgan needs help. Here's some things you can do to help her respond to the emotion," and so, that's just one of the big pieces, like, I remember looking back and just being so confused and overwhelmed and, like,
Mhm.
pulling away from my family in a little bit because I was like, I'm not getting what I need over here. And so just walking my own experience while carrying the emotional baggage was like so hard as I'm
Yeah.
stepping into being an adult and having this independence. Like, I really had to do a lot of my own work in the last decade or however long it's been to undo a lot of that emotional damage that happened during that time. And
Yeah.
so that's one piece that I wish I knew, or I wish somebody would have told my parents to tell me that it's okay to be feeling what's coming up. It's a normal response to what was happening in my family at the time, and
Yeah.
it's okay to feel that way. I'm not a burden, I'm not a drama queen, I'm not the problem child because I'm feeling this. Really, I'm probably expressing for the others in the family who aren't as vocal about their emotions, like, it's probably what they're feeling too, and I just happen to be the one blessed with talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As we wrap up, what else do you feel like would be really helpful for, we'll just say, betray partners that were, every time you talk, my thought is, ideally, we want both parents that are involved in this, and really the betrayer who created the harm to everyone with the
Yeah.
behaviors to be able to make this part of their work and their healing and their accountability and responsibility to repair. A lot of
Yeah.
times they see the betrayed partners trying to repair for that. That was a big thing too for me, is releasing that responsibility. I wanted to own everything that my kids suffered from. And my therapist for years was like, stop, you can't own everything. You didn't create everything. So I think that is a message that I think sometimes betray partners need to hear. Stop trying to own everything. And betrayers, if you're the ones that cause the harm, if you're listening to this, like, and you want to know how you can help, start owning this piece too. But because I know we have both that listen, but what, I guess, would you want your final, I guess, words or message to be? And let's just say to both, however you want to split that up.
Yeah. Mm. I am so glad you invited that perspective and that voice because I agree. I think both parents have a responsibility and a duty to be part of this conversation and this work, that it doesn't fall to one parent or the other to shoulder like the burden of supporting your kids. Really, the best, I'm air quoting, the best outcome is when both parents are involved and can be open and have these conversations and inviting their kids into healing in this way. But if I had to give like one message, and this is just to both of them, and I've said this before, if you've heard me on other podcasts, I'm always like, don't forget about your kids. That in your healing journey, I know that sometimes as the parents, like, you are trying to just keep your head above water and you're also in crisis and you're also responding to your own trauma responses and shame responses, and it can be so messy. And if nobody else in the professional world remembers to tell you, let me be the voice that you remember. Don't forget about your kids. That they also are walking through their own, sometimes chaos, their own crisis, their own trauma response. And a lot of times they will come up with these maladaptive behaviors or coping strategies because they can't turn to their parents because their parents are in crisis and they don't have a safe place to process that. And so they'll figure out how to be okay. And we're doing them a disservice if we're not acknowledging the pain and the harm that is happening to them. And I know, and I also, like, no shame to any parent. I never want you to listen to anything I say and, "Well, Morgan thinks this about." I don't. I actually have mad respect for parents who are showing, because if you're listening to this, you're putting in at least a little bit of effort to heal. And so I have mad respect for parents who show up in this space and again just acknowledge that each member of the entire family system has an opportunity to heal and has their own path and journey of recovery and invite your kids to step into that because they need to heal too.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, can you name your podcast is?
Yes, my podcast is the Healing Betrayed Families podcast. And it's new. I have like 7 or 8 episodes right now, and I'm excited. I have so many great guests that are coming on in the coming months and topics galore that people just keep suggesting. And so I am so excited to be creating this resource. And if you're listening and you're like, please release an episode on this, send me all the ideas. Like I have such an excitement for it right now. And I appreciate everyone who has tuned in. And if you're sharing it, I'm really just trying to create a resource for families and so excited.
I'm excited too. And thank you for coming on and talking. You're the best.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I loved it. So fun.
I hope that conversation was helpful today and you got something out of it that can help you have more of an empowered divorce. I'm excited for next week's episode with Hannah Gordon to hear from a young woman who experienced the majority of her growing up years with an awareness of betrayal in her parents' relationship. Today, I want to leave you with a few takeaways that you can start practicing right now. You know how I love to do that. First, slow down. Really listen to your kids. Their questions often hold deeper layers of what they are feeling. And then second, give them a language that makes sense of their reality without oversharing so that they can start putting the pieces of their story together in a safe way. Having them work with a therapist that can help them write their story, create their story, and own their story can be such a beautiful healing for them that you can support. And the third is validate their emotions, even the messy ones, especially the messy ones, because allowing them to feel without judgment is one of the most powerful ways that you can support their healing. Remember, the work that you do to create clarity, safety, and understanding your now new family doesn't just help your kids. It also is going to give you more space to reclaim your own sense of agency and peace because you are the chooser in your life and you can start showing up differently and modeling that emotional intelligence and creating a new experience for both you and your children because you can. Take care, everybody.